Remember when he said, I want to smell your bloomers?
Yeah.
No, he says, what do you feel it beating?
That's good, isn't it?
Oh, but the way it's packed.
Tänk, det är många som har sagt till mig att jag är en bra lyssnerska.
Ran away from home. Her family's big social...
What if the movies people called too dangerous in the 1960s were actually showing us the future? Before modern ratings existed, filmmakers were already attacking censorship, marriage, politics, identity, desire, and social rules Hollywood was terrified to question. Some were banned, some were cut, and several later carried the brand new X rating. Before we open this forbidden movie vault, hit like, and if you enjoy forgotten cinema history, subscribe to the channel, because the films near number 1 changed Hollywood forever. Number 24, The Vixens, 1969.
What do you think of these, sweetheart?
Beautiful.
Imagine a suburban drama discussing open marriages before mainstream Hollywood was even comfortable admitting unhappy marriages existed. That is the strange territory explored by The Vixens, also circulated under titles including Friends and Lovers and The Women. The story follows Betty and Bob, a married couple whose relationship survives through unconventional arrangements. When another dissatisfied couple moves nearby, the characters begin testing the boundaries of marriage, loyalty, jealousy, and personal freedom. Instead of presenting suburban life as perfectly respectable, the movie suggests that respectable appearances may hide complicated private agreements. One of its most memorable developments involves the couples realizing that their unusual arrangement does not necessarily destroy their marriages. In a strange way, it temporarily holds them together. That was an explosive idea in 1969. American television was still selling audiences spotless suburban households, while this X-rated independent picture was asking whether traditional marriage worked for everybody. The filmmaking is rough, but the questions sound surprisingly modern. If you're already discovering films you never knew existed, give the video a like and share it with someone who loves controversial movie history. And make sure you're subscribed, because these films become far more famous and far more daring from here. Number 23, Cherry, Harry, and Raquel, 1969.
Well...
Nothing about Russ Meyer's filmmaking was subtle, and this late 60s crime picture proves it almost immediately. Beneath its outrageous exploitation surface, however, is something surprisingly modern, a movie that deliberately treats traditional genre rules as optional. Harry is a corrupt lawman involved with a criminal operation near the Mexican border. Around him are Cherry, Raquel, Enrique, and a collection of criminals whose alliances change rapidly. What begins like a desert crime story becomes an intentionally exaggerated mixture of corruption, adult comedy, violence, and visual experimentation. The unforgettable moments are not necessarily individual plot points, but the sudden interruptions. Meyer inserts surreal images, bizarre transitions, and scenes that almost seem to attack the audience rather than smoothly continue the story. That fractured editing feels closer to music videos and experimental modern cinema than conventional 1969 Hollywood. It received an X rating, but its lasting importance comes from Meyer's refusal to behave like a respectable studio filmmaker. Everything is heightened, fast, excessive, and knowingly artificial, a style later exploitation directors would copy endlessly. Number 22, Coming Apart, 1969. Decades before people willingly recorded their private lives for reality television, Coming Apart imagined a disturbing version of life permanently observed through a camera. Rip Torn plays Joe Glazer, a psychiatrist whose personal life is collapsing. He rents an apartment under another name and secretly positions a camera behind a mirror. Visitors enter, conversations unfold, relationships form and break apart, while the unmoving camera records everything. That setup produces the film's most famous visual idea. Almost the entire movie feels as though the audience is watching material captured by surveillance equipment rather than a conventional film crew. Characters frequently move awkwardly within the frame, disappear from view, or approach the mirror without realizing what lies behind it. For 1969, the concept was startling. Its X rating came from adult material, but what makes the picture seem prophetic is its obsession with recording private behavior. Hidden cameras, emotional exhibitionism, collapsing boundaries between observer and participant. Those ideas became normal parts of modern culture. Coming Apart was exploring them when home video itself barely existed. Number 21, Greetings, 1968.
Leaves it there, she doesn't back off. Just leaves it.
Before Brian De Palma became famous for polished thrillers, he made this chaotic counterculture comedy, that earned one of the earliest X ratings under America's new system. Rather than following a conventional plot, the movie jumps among three young New Yorkers dealing with military conscription, conspiracy theories, dating, filmmaking, and the political insanity surrounding them. Robert De Niro appears as John Rubin, a character who would later return in Hi, Mom. One memorable thread follows Lloyd's obsession with the Kennedy assassination. He studies photographs and imagined bullet paths with the intensity of someone convinced the official explanation cannot possibly tell the whole story. That feels remarkably contemporary. Even the filmmaking was unusual. Characters address the audience, images interrupt other images, and the story sometimes behaves like a collection of internet-era sketches, decades before such a format existed. The X rating gave Greetings notoriety, but its mixture of media obsession, conspiracy culture, politics, and fragmented storytelling is what truly makes it look ahead of 1968. Number 20. The Leather Boys, 1964.
What is it? Well, Granddad's just died.
Behind the motorcycles and working-class London streets is a relationship story British cinema rarely dared to approach this directly in the early 1960s. Reggie is a young mechanic who marries Dot while both are still emotionally immature. Their marriage quickly deteriorates. Reggie begins spending more time with Pete, another biker, and gradually discovers that Pete's feelings toward him are more complicated than ordinary friendship. The most important scenes are remarkably quiet. Instead of turning Pete into a monster or delivering a sensational speech, the film reveals his identity through small moments, glances, awkward conversations, and Reggie's growing understanding of what his friend wants. That restraint was revolutionary. Mainstream movies of the period usually avoided gay characters or buried them beneath coded language. The Leather Boys put the subject inside an ordinary working-class environment and allowed Pete to exist as a recognizable human being. Its treatment is certainly dated in places, yet merely placing these characters at the center of a serious drama made the film years ahead of mainstream representation. Number 19. Scorpio Rising, 1963. Only about half an hour long, Kenneth Anger's underground masterpiece influenced generations of filmmakers with almost no conventional dialogue at all. The movie follows a group of bikers preparing themselves and their machines, while Anger connects motorcycle culture with celebrity worship, religion, rebellion, masculinity, and dangerous political imagery. Instead of explaining these ideas, he smashes them together through editing. Its legendary contribution is the soundtrack. Popular songs, including bright early 60s hits, play over dark, provocative imagery. That contrast creates meanings the pictures could never produce alone. Today, using an existing pop song to transform a movie sequence is completely normal. In 1963, Anger was demonstrating just how powerful that technique could become. Authorities objected to the film, screenings faced controversy, and its imagery made it notorious in underground circles. Yet modern viewers may be surprised by something else. Scorpio Rising often feels like a music video created 20 years before MTV. Fast montage, pop music, cultural symbols, fashion, subculture, and attitude dominate everything. Cinema was already changing underground before Hollywood noticed. Number 18. Faster, Pussycat. Kill, Kill, 1965. Three women racing sports cars through the California desert might not sound revolutionary today. In 1965, giving those women nearly all the physical power in an exploitation movie certainly was. Russ Meyer's cult classic follows Varla, Rosie, and Billy, three dancers who leave their club and begin a reckless journey through the desert. After encountering a young couple, events spiral toward a remote house where an elderly man is rumored to be hiding money. The movie's most famous image arrives almost immediately, cars roaring across the desert as the women compete with complete confidence. Varla, played by Tura Satana, dominates nearly everyone she encounters. What made the film unusual was the reversal of expected roles. These women were not waiting to be rescued. They drove the cars, controlled confrontations, made decisions, and pushed the story forward. Its exaggerated style later became hugely influential in cult cinema. Filmmakers including Quentin Tarantino would embrace similar combinations of pulp dialogue, powerful women, fast cars, and knowingly excessive genre filmmaking. Once dismissed as cheap exploitation, it now looks like a blueprint. Number 17. Repulsion, 1965.
Don't forget to give the money, otherwise we shall both be out onto the street.
Few psychological horror films had placed viewers this deeply inside a character's collapsing perception, before Roman Polanski made Repulsion. Catherine Deneuve plays Carol, a quiet young woman living with her sister in London. When she is eventually left alone in the apartment, everyday surroundings become increasingly threatening. Cracks spread across walls, rooms appear to change shape, and her isolation turns ordinary objects into sources of terror. One famous sequence involves hands seeming to emerge from the walls while Carol moves through the hallway. The effect is simple, but its meaning is disturbing, because viewers can no longer determine where reality ends and her terrified imagination begins. That approach changed horror. Rather than giving audiences a traditional monster, Repulsion makes the character's unstable perception the monster. Modern psychological films regularly use distorted sound, unreliable imagery, and subjective camera work in exactly this way. Its adult themes caused controversy, but the film's true boldness came from refusing easy explanations. More than 60 years later, that ambiguity still makes it uncomfortable. Number 16. The Pawnbroker, 1964.
Got that in my mind for sure.
Hollywood censorship rules were already weakening when Sidney Lumet's devastating drama pushed directly against them. Rod Steiger plays Sol Nazerman, a Holocaust survivor operating a pawn shop in Harlem. Emotionally disconnected from nearly everyone around him, Sol has buried his memories so deeply that ordinary moments suddenly trigger horrifying fragments from his past. The movie's most famous sequences use rapid flashes of memory rather than long explanatory scenes. A face, an object, or an ordinary gesture can suddenly throw Sol back into experiences he desperately wants to forget. Even more importantly, the film challenged the production code over brief nudity that Lumet considered artistically necessary. The controversy became another sign that Hollywood's censorship system could no longer survive unchanged. Yet the adult content is not what makes The Pawnbroker feel modern. It is the fragmented editing and serious treatment of psychological trauma. The film understands that memory does not always return neatly. Sometimes it arrives in violent fragments. Modern dramas frequently use this language. Lumet was doing it while Hollywood was still arguing about what audiences were even allowed to see. Number 15. The Silence, 1963. A train arrives in a strange European city. Two sisters enter a nearly empty hotel, and communication begins collapsing around them. Ingmar Bergman turned that simple situation into one of the decade's most controversial art films. Esther is seriously ill, while Anna wants independence from her controlling sister. Anna's young son, Johann, wanders through the enormous hotel, meeting mysterious figures and observing adults whose behavior he cannot understand. Meanwhile, the sisters' resentment becomes increasingly intense. One unforgettable sequence simply follows Johann through the hotel's long corridors. Nothing traditionally frightening happens, yet the unfamiliar language, empty spaces, and distant sounds make the building feel almost unreal. Contemporary audiences concentrated heavily on the movie's sexual frankness, and cuts or restrictions appeared in several markets. But Bergman was interested in more than provocation. The film asks what happens when people lose the ability to communicate with family, lovers, strangers, and even God. Its unnamed country and invented language make everyone feel emotionally stranded. That mixture of sexuality, alienation, fractured family relationships, and existential uncertainty became central to European art cinema. The Silence reached that territory, while many mainstream movies still treated adult relationships like carefully sanitized advertisements. Number 14. The Fox, 1968.
Environment. He can be a severe predator.
Two women living together on an isolated Canadian farm might sound like a quiet rural drama. Mark Rydell transformed that setup into one of the period's most controversial examinations of sexuality and emotional power. Jill and Ellen have built a life away from conventional society. Their relationship carries an intimacy that 1960s Hollywood rarely addressed openly. Everything changes when Paul, a merchant sailor, arrives and becomes fascinated with Ellen. From there, the farm becomes an emotional battlefield. One of the film's strongest recurring images is the fox itself, moving through the property while Jill worries about protecting their chickens. The animal gradually becomes a symbol connected to Paul, desire, danger, and the outside world invading their isolated existence. Instead of presenting relationships in simple categories, the movie allows attraction, jealousy, dependence, fear, and social pressure to overlap. That complexity helped create controversy. especially because same-sex relationships were still heavily restricted by mainstream cinema conventions. Today, audiences may criticize some of the film's conclusions, but its willingness to make sexuality central to a serious prestige drama was unmistakably bold. The old production code was collapsing, and the Fox demonstrated exactly why. Number 13. The Killing of Sister George, 1968.
Put your slippers on. Move that shoe. Ah!
Hollywood had shown gay characters before 1968, but rarely with this much screen time, emotional messiness, anger, jealousy, and refusal to make them polite. Beryl Reid plays June Buckridge, an actress famous for portraying the lovable Sister George on a television soap opera. Away from the cameras, June is difficult, insecure, sharp-tongued, and terrified that producers are planning to remove her character. Her private relationship with Alice becomes even more unstable when television executive Mercy Croft enters their lives. One of the most memorable sequences takes place inside a lesbian nightclub. Instead of merely hinting that such a community exists somewhere off-screen, the movie actually enters the space and lets the audience see a social world mainstream Hollywood largely pretended was invisible. The picture later became associated with the new X-rating era, and its adult relationship material created enormous controversy. What makes it seem modern is that June is allowed to be complicated. She is neither a spotless representative nor a simple villain. She's funny, cruel, vulnerable, possessive, frightened, and sometimes self-destructive. Representation today frequently demands flawed characters instead of symbols. Robert Aldrich was already making that argument in 1968. Number 12. Teorema, 1968. A mysterious stranger enters a wealthy Italian family's home, changes every member of the household, and then disappears. What follows is not a normal drama. It is almost a philosophical experiment disguised as a movie. Terence Stamp plays the unnamed visitor in Pier Paolo Pasolini's Teorema. Father, mother, son, daughter, and maid each become emotionally attached to him. When he suddenly announces his departure, their comfortable identities collapse. The father's transformation produces perhaps the film's most famous image. After rejecting his possessions and position, he eventually wanders into a barren landscape, stripped of the identity that once defined him. Nothing about the movie offers easy answers. Is the visitor human, spiritual, destructive, liberating? Pasolini refuses to explain. That ambiguity was radical, but so was the film's suggestion that respectable middle-class life might be nothing more than a fragile performance. Desire becomes a force capable of exposing emptiness beneath wealth, family roles, religion, and social status. Authorities in Italy became involved in an obscenity dispute surrounding the film, but reducing Teorema to scandal misses the point. Its real provocation was philosophical. It asks whether people truly know who they are once society's labels disappear. Number 11. Weekend, 1967. Imagine a road movie in which civilization slowly falls apart, while the characters continue worrying about money, cars, and personal convenience. Jean-Luc Godard turned that nightmare into one of the strangest films of the decade. A bourgeois couple travels through the French countryside, hoping to secure an inheritance. Their journey becomes increasingly absurd as they encounter wrecked vehicles, violent arguments, political speeches, historical figures, and social chaos. Then comes the scene almost everyone remembers. Godard's camera tracks along an enormous traffic jam for minutes, revealing endless honking cars, frustrated drivers, roadside games, arguments, and finally the reason traffic has stopped. What normally would have been a simple transition becomes an attack on consumer society itself. The sequence still feels daring because Godard refuses to hurry. As the film progresses, conventional storytelling essentially disintegrates. Characters speak directly about politics. Reality mixes with fiction. Society becomes increasingly savage. Modern experimental filmmakers frequently dismantle genre rules in similar ways, but Weekend was doing it in 1967. Its adult content contributed to the controversy, yet its bigger offense was telling comfortable audiences that the civilization surrounding them might be far less civilized than they wanted to believe. Number 10. Persona, 1966.
Om du är sann eller förljugen.
Two women, one isolated house, and a camera that eventually seems unsure where one identity ends and another begins. Ingmar Bergman created a psychological puzzle that filmmakers are still borrowing from. Actress Elizabeth Vogler suddenly stops speaking despite apparently being physically healthy. Nurse Alma is assigned to care for her, and the pair retreat to a seaside home. Because Elizabeth remains silent, Alma begins filling the emptiness with increasingly personal confessions. Gradually, their identities appear to overlap. The movie's famous close-ups eventually combine the women's faces, visually suggesting that Alma and Elizabeth may be reflecting, consuming, or transforming one another. Then Bergman goes even further. The film itself appears to break. Images burn, frames interrupt the narrative, and viewers are reminded that they are watching manufactured cinema. That kind of self-awareness became common decades later. In 1966, it could feel almost like the projector had malfunctioned. Its frank adult conversation also challenged expectations about what respectable actresses were supposed to discuss on screen. Yet Persona remains revolutionary because it turns identity into something unstable. Films about doubles, fractured personalities, unreliable reality, and psychological merging still live in the shadow of what Bergman accomplished here. Number 9. Belle de Jour, 1967.
Embrassez-moi.
A beautiful Parisian housewife appears to have everything society says she should want: money, elegance, security, and a loving husband. Yet inside her imagination exists an entirely different life. Catherine Deneuve plays Séverine, who begins secretly spending her afternoons at Madame Anaïs's establishment, while maintaining her respectable marriage. Luis Buñuel refuses to treat this merely as scandal. Instead, he explores the gap between public identity and private fantasy. The famous mysterious box scene captures his method perfectly. A client arrives carrying a small box. Something inside produces a strange sound. Other characters react to its contents, but Buñuel never shows the audience what is actually there. That decision makes imagination more provocative than anything he could have displayed. Throughout the film, fantasies appear without clear warning, and viewers are often forced to decide afterward whether an event really happened. That blending of reality and desire was astonishingly modern. Rather than judging Séverine with a simple moral lesson, the movie leaves her psychologically mysterious. She can be devoted to her husband while also possessing desires she cannot explain. Modern cinema often celebrates complicated female interior lives. Belle de Jour was exploring exactly that territory in 1967. Number 8. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, 1966.
Years old. There's probably an irony there someplace, but I'm not.
The most shocking thing about this movie wasn't what audiences saw. It was what 4 adults were finally allowed to say. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton play Martha and George, a married couple who invite younger couple Nick and Honey home after a university party. What begins as late-night drinking becomes psychological warfare. Secrets turn into weapons. Affection becomes humiliation. Every conversation feels like someone quietly loading another gun. One legendary moment comes as George and Martha reveal that their marriage revolves around elaborate private games. As the night progresses, the younger guests realize they have not attended a party. They have walked into years of unresolved pain. Mike Nichols refused to transform Edward Albee's play into harmless Hollywood entertainment. Language that previously would have been considered impossible in a major studio film remained. Warner Bros. Even restricted younger viewers, despite the old production code system still technically existing. That battle mattered enormously. If Hollywood could release a serious, prestigious picture filled with adult language and damaged relationships, what exactly was the old censorship code protecting anymore? The movie's success helped prove that audiences could handle adult material without filmmakers pretending grown people spoke like television characters. Number 7. Blow Up, 1966.
And it sorts itself out. And adds up.
A fashion photographer thinks he may have accidentally photographed a murder. Instead of solving the mystery, the closer he looks, the less certain reality becomes. Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up follows Thomas through the fashionable world of swinging London. During a visit to a park, he photographs a couple from a distance. Back in his studio, enlargements reveal strange details hidden in the background. Perhaps there is a gun. Perhaps there is a body. Perhaps Thomas is simply creating meaning because he desperately wants the photographs to mean something. The enlargement sequence became legendary. Thomas repeatedly magnifies sections of the images until recognizable reality dissolves into grain. More information does not provide more certainty. It destroys certainty. That idea feels almost designed for the digital age. People now zoom into photographs, freeze videos, examine pixels, build theories, and convince themselves that images reveal objective truth. Antonioni questioned that confidence decades earlier. The film also openly challenged Hollywood censorship. MGM released it without production code approval, rather than remove controversial material. Its commercial success was devastating evidence against the old system. Hollywood discovered something frightening. Audiences might actually prefer movies the censors told them they should not see. Number 6. If, 1968.
Said by whom?
Long before films regularly portrayed schools as miniature societies filled with class conflict, authoritarian rules, and rebellion, Lindsay Anderson turned a British boarding school into a political pressure cooker. Malcolm McDowell plays Mick Travis, a student increasingly unwilling to obey the rituals surrounding him. Older pupils dominate younger ones, teachers protect tradition, punishments become humiliating, and the institution seems more interested in obedience than education. Reality gradually becomes stranger. Some scenes appear in color, others suddenly switch to black and white, creating an unstable world where fantasy and reality begin blending together. Then comes the explosive finale. During a school ceremony, rebellion moves from private resistance to surreal confrontation. Anderson does not offer a comfortable explanation for whether viewers should interpret everything literally. That refusal was part of the film's power. Released during a year of worldwide student demonstrations, If captured a generation increasingly suspicious of institutions demanding respect simply because they were old. Mick became a prototype for countless rebellious characters who followed. Today, movies attacking elite schools, abusive hierarchies, and inherited privilege are common. In 1968, Anderson turned those ideas into something dangerous, stylish, and deliberately unresolved. Number 5. Women in Love, 1969.
Tibby and Laura Lupton.
A quiet conversation about relationships eventually leads to one of the most famous wrestling scenes in British cinema, and one of the moments that demonstrated how quickly screen boundaries were changing. Ken Russell's adaptation of D.H. Lawrence follows sisters Gudrun and Ursula Brangwyn as they become involved with Gerald Critch and Rupert Birkin. Instead of presenting romance as a path toward automatic happiness, the movie treats love as a philosophical argument. Can two people belong together without possessing each other? Can marriage survive personal independence? And can emotional intimacy exist outside traditional expectations? Those questions drive almost every relationship. The celebrated fireside wrestling sequence between Gerald and Rupert became controversial because the two men appear unclothed, something mainstream English-language cinema had rarely presented so directly. Yet the scene is not simply included to shock. Their physical struggle reflects the emotional attraction, competition, and intimacy they cannot easily express through conversation. That complexity makes the film feel decades younger than it is. Russell also allows the women genuine emotional and intellectual power, rather than treating them merely as romantic rewards. The result is messy, sensual, philosophical, and visually extravagant. A relationship movie made before Hollywood fully understood how complicated relationship movies could become. Number 4. Medium Cool, 1969.
Drop your newspaper.
Who are you?
Most films recreate history after it happens. Haskell Wexler placed fictional characters directly inside history while it was happening. Robert Forster plays John Casellas, a television cameraman who initially approaches suffering as professional material. He records accidents, political events, and struggling communities while maintaining emotional distance. Eventually, the observer becomes part of what he observes. Wexler filmed around the real 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, where protests and police confrontations erupted. Fictional characters move through actual crowds as real disorder unfolds around them. At one point, a voice from the production can famously be heard warning that tear gas is approaching. Suddenly, the boundary between movie and documentary disappears. That technique seems completely natural today. Filmmakers mix stage drama with genuine events, handheld footage, news images, and documentary aesthetics constantly. Medium Cool was pushing that hybrid approach when Hollywood movies were still usually polished and controlled. Its X rating added another layer of controversy, but Wexler was more interested in media ethics. Should a cameraman help someone, or keep filming? Does recording suffering create understanding, or turn pain into entertainment? In the age of phones filming almost every public tragedy, those questions are arguably even more uncomfortable now than they were in 1969. Number 3. I Am Curious, Yellow, 1967.
Jag har varit ute och firat semester och inte prata politik.
Few movies of the 1960s caused trouble on this scale. Prints were seized by American customs, court battles followed, cities attempted bans, and suddenly, a Swedish art film became a national argument about what adults should be allowed to watch. Lena Nyman plays a fictionalized version of herself, a politically curious young woman questioning Swedish society. She interviews ordinary people about class, politics, nonviolence, religion, and social inequality, while also examining her own relationships. But director Vilgot Sherman refuses to separate documentary from fiction. Actors discuss filmmaking. Political interviews interrupt the story. Personal relationships become political debates. The audience is repeatedly reminded that cinema itself can manipulate reality. The scenes involving Lena questioning people on the street are especially fascinating today. She behaves almost like a modern documentary presenter, confronting strangers with uncomfortable questions and exposing contradictions in public attitudes. Its intimate material generated the headlines, but that was only one piece of the provocation. The movie linked personal freedom with political freedom. That idea, that relationships, identity, economics, social power, and politics cannot easily be separated, would become increasingly influential in later decades. What frightened authorities was not simply what appeared on screen. It was a movie asking viewers who had the right to decide what adults could see in the first place. Number 2. Flesh, 1968.
You're really beautiful. But don't you feel like down I am like...
Andy Warhol's name may have sold the controversy, but Paul Morrissey's filmmaking made Flesh far stranger and more culturally important than a simple underground shock picture. Joe D'Alessandro plays Joe, a young New Yorker moving through one day while trying to raise money for his household. He encounters artists, customers, friends, hustlers, and eccentric factory personalities, as the movie observes a world mainstream Hollywood virtually ignored. There is barely a conventional plot. Instead, Morrissey lets conversations stretch, allows awkward pauses to remain, and treats people from New York's underground culture as worthy of occupying the screen without being transformed into respectable studio characters. That was the revolution. Its most famous images center on D'Alessandro himself. The camera treats the male body with the kind of fascinated attention Hollywood had historically reserved for actresses. That reversal helped challenge assumptions about who cinema was allowed to look at and who was allowed to look back. The film also included queer and transgender figures without building its entire story around explaining their existence to a mainstream audience. Years before independent cinema made marginalized urban communities a serious subject, Warhol's circle was simply putting them in front of cameras. The rough sound, natural performances, loose structure, and street-level atmosphere anticipate the American independent cinema that would flourish much later. It looked cheap because it was cheap. What Hollywood failed to notice was that cheap could also mean free. Number 1. Midnight Cowboy, 1969. Here is the movie that destroyed one of the biggest assumptions Hollywood ever had about the X rating, that an X-rated film could never become respectable. John Voight plays Joe Buck, a naive Texan who travels to New York believing wealthy women will happily support his new life. Instead, the city humiliates him. Money disappears, opportunities fail, and his fantasy of effortless success collapses. Then he meets Ratso Rizzo. Played brilliantly by Dustin Hoffman, Ratso is a sickly street hustler living in terrible conditions while dreaming of escaping to sunny Florida. Their relationship begins with manipulation, but slowly becomes genuine friendship. One famous moment happens as the pair cross a busy New York street and a taxi nearly hits Hoffman. His furious reaction became one of cinema's most recognizable pieces of street-level realism. The film openly dealt with poverty, male vulnerability, unconventional sexuality, loneliness, exploitation, and people living outside respectable society. It received an X rating, and then did something nobody expected. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture. That victory proved adult subject matter did not automatically make a movie worthless or obscene. A film labeled too mature for younger audiences could still be recognized as serious American art. Hollywood had spent decades hiding uncomfortable people. Midnight Cowboy put them at the center of the screen and asked audiences to care about them. That is why, more than half a century later, its original rating seems less important than the door it helped kick open. So which of these movies was genuinely ahead of its time, and which one still goes too far even today? The wildest thing is that filmmakers were fighting these battles before Hollywood even knew what its new rating system would become. If you enjoyed this journey through the forbidden side of 1960s cinema, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which controversial decade we should uncover next.